I worked in a mental health emergency service that very helpfully was housed in the local police department. Because when things kicked up in the middle of the night, no one really wanted to go to a clinic that was all dark and spooky. Actually, some of the kids did like going to the clinic that was dark and spooky, but no one else did. And the police department was always open and had good snacks. And so over those years, I got to know a lot of police officers and firefighters. And they would talk about seeing sides of life that most other people didn't see. And as a psychologist, that was our bridge. We were different, but we had that in common. And I remember once asking this officer I got to be friendly with. I won a lot of money from him at poker, and that built a good friendship. It was penny poker, but it was very satisfying, actually, a bag of pennies to carry home. And I said, well, you know, do you talk about this stuff with other people? The stuff that, you know, we see on our shifts? And he said, well, you pick who you talk to, and sometimes you do, and those are great relationships. And sometimes you just let it go, because people aren't going to understand. I want to talk a lot about health professionals and healthcare, in part because that's what I do. And while I have a white coat in the closet somewhere, I'm not wearing one this morning. And I want this to be an experience where I can talk about my world and you can talk about yours, maybe a little more freely than sometimes happens between folks in health professionals. You have to, well, you don't have to, but you can get a lot of mileage from figuring out the ways in which science, health systems, doctors, nurses, other kinds of professionals can give you some of what you're looking for. I want to talk about what some of those ways are. I'm going to talk about this in a pretty plain-spoken way, but the scientific evidence behind it is really solid. Number one is to find ways to talk so that doctors will listen to you. Come in with a list, because you know how they can intimidate you? The list can help them not to intimidate you. Remember, I once worked with family of a kid who had fallen and broken his back. And the main kind of doctor they had to deal with was a spine surgeon. Really busy guy, great with his hands in the operating room. He had the bedside manner of a slug. It was awful. So he flies into the room like his white coat was flapping behind him. And he says to the kid, "How you doing today?" This kid had a broken back and chronic pain and a lot of stuff going on, but he was a nice kid. So he answered, "I'm fine, doctor." Doctor flies out of the room, writes in the chart, "Patient is feeling fine, ready to be discharged from care," meaning no more PT prescription, which would have been fatal. So I was speaking about that with my 12-year-old patient and later with his folks, and we were figuring out creative, playful ways of what to do. We were talking about making a list. Well, you can always count on 12-year-olds to have more creative ideas than you do. He got a roll of paper towels and a magic marker and started writing his list on the roll of paper towels. And then the next time he saw the surgeon, he unrolled the roll of paper towels. And when the surgeon said, "How are you today?" he started reading from this roll that was spilling out all over the guy's office. That got him to stop and pay attention. As parents, you can provide the kind of very detailed observations that help doctors and other professionals do their best kind of work. Ask all of your questions and do not let them rush you. Why don't you repeat that after me? Again, do not let them rush you. Louder. That's right. Do not let them rush you. So here's a great story. I was once working with a little girl with chronic illness, and she, like me, walked with a cane. I'm bimodal, can walk a little bit. We both walked with canes. So her doctor was making hospital rounds and would come early in the morning when she wasn't quite awake and barrage her with all these questions and then fly out before she could really ask him what she wanted to know. So she was asking me what to do about that, and I said, you really gotta attract the guy's attention. You can poke him in the shoulder, you can shout, you can wave your hands, and she was nodding real vigorously, which always gives a psychologist the delusion that someone is agreeing with you, right? So the next morning, she was full of our conversation, and the doctor rushes in, and before she could get her questions out, he was about to walk out. So she tripped him with her cane. And he fell and broke his leg, which isn't funny, but actually it sort of kind of is. I'm not the kind of psychologist that gets angry at kids for stuff like that. I mean, I admired her technique and wondered when I might replicate it if I would ever have to. But the really interesting thing came later that day in the cafeteria, actually 2 weeks later, when the poor doctor was out of the hospital and comes in with his leg in a cast and crutches and, all this stuff. And he comes up to me, and for some reason, he wasn't happy to see me. I don't know why, really. And he said, what did you tell your patient to do? I said, I told her to get your attention because she had some questions that she needed you to answer. And he said, well, look what happened. And I looked at him and said, did it work? And we've had a wonderful relationship ever since. See? Fully recovered. Health professionals tend to be very busy. We tend to be very stressed. We have a lot buzzing in our minds. It's useful to know that and to make space for that, to be respectful and to be empathic, especially when it's hard. And it's also real important to get in their face. Why don't you repeat that one back too? Get in their face. Louder, please. Get in their face. I have an eye doctor who is the reason I can still see. Not supposed to be able to see. And he is like one of the 5 world experts in what I have. And I go in, it's been a lot of years now, I go in with my lists. I have about 45 seconds to convey them to him, and he knows that's coming at the end of every appointment. I look him in the eye, I ask my 3 things, I'm concise, and he always answers the questions. That's where you want to be. One day he gave me 2 minutes instead of 45 seconds. I was shocked. I said, what happened? Are you okay? He said, no, it's that you're good. So that's where you want to get to. The other thing is that you want to listen so that your doctor can talk. a doctor is going to want to know what kind of information, what kind of detail do you want to take in? Do you want to get out of there quickly to go to that pizza that, we've just learned that we're expected to provide at most visits? Alternatively, it's some other kind of exciting kid food. You might want all the details. They don't know off the top of their heads. I don't know what you're going to want. And you want to listen to what they're saying in a way that encourages them to talk more. 4 years ago, I was in the hospital unexpectedly. Something really, really bad had happened to me. Details are not important. It wasn't clear how this was going to pan out. There were 6 different kinds of specialists assigned to me. I was really lucky. I was in a great hospital. That was because I told my partner, don't take me to the local one. We're driving 20 minutes farther to the one I want to go to. And I gave that look that meant I really mean it. And we got there, and so the 6 specialists came every morning. And a lot was going on. There was a lot to take in. They had a sense of who I was. One morning, one of the specialists lingered after the rounds and said, I don't usually say this to people, but from the way you've been listening to us, it rounds every morning. I think you would want to know this. We're doing all we can. We're doing and I knew all those words. I knew all the technical terms I wanted to know. And he said, you're probably not going to make it. And that was exactly what I wanted to know, because they'd all been overly rosy with me, and I knew I was in bad shape. I wanted to know that so I could figure out my own strategies and options. The point was that I had given them the notion that I was going to listen in such a way to draw them out. That often is a useful tactic. There's a notion that my colleague, Dr. Ann Steiner, has developed called the Pain Price Index. So there's a lot of standard healthcare discourse that says, don't do this, and don't do that, and don't do this, and don't do that, and do this, and do this, and do this, and do this. And, there can be a lot of wisdom in that. Like we heard, you got to take your medicine. You don't want to take it. That's very nice. Take it, You got to go to your appointments, else you won't get the pizza. You got to do all these things. No contact sports, no this, no that. But the other reality is that if there's a price for something, and it's something that you really, really want to do, sometimes you decide to pay the price. So we heard from a teenager that really wanted to ride horses. Are there risks to that? So I've been told, because I'm not riding any horses. She can ride my horse. She really wanted to ride a horse. After conversation, after thought, after planning, after safety measures, she has an intuitive sense of the pain price index. In her situation, in her family, with her reality, riding that horse is a great idea. And then there's a notion that I owe to Alcoholics Anonymous, a very wise group of people, which is keep showing up. You got to be thorough. Sometimes you got to let the treatments work to find out whether they're going to work or not. Sometimes you have to try a lot of different things. I like that notion about the silk sheets. And I trust you. I am never going to hear the word cool again. As a child psychologist, I hear that many times per minute without thinking of your kids and those ice water baths. You have to figure out what's going to work. Maybe the one oatmeal won't, but the one in the sock will. Got to keep your follow-ups even if you're not sure why you're going, because that's how relationships develop, and it's when you have a relationship with a healthcare professional that the best outcomes are going to happen. The other thing is that you may be going to doctors who just aren't giving you what you need. And you may have to keep on your journey and find a different center or a different person who's going to solve a piece of the puzzle. Here's a story about that. A number of years ago, I was working for a university that sent me to do some research on a tropical island and paid the bill. I thought that was really great. I got the airplane, the hotel, and the coconuts. I also got a skin disease. And I came back with a pretty miserable skin disease. So all those stories about itching, been there, done that, was paying attention. And I would go from doctor to doctor, trying to figure out what, if anything, could be done about the skin disease. Year and a half, 12 different dermatologists, nothing was happening. So finally, I got a job at a hospital that gave me HMO insurance. And I dutifully said, well, I'm your patient now, so send me to your dermatologist. This was in New York. Their dermatologist worked one afternoon a month. It was a bad HMO. Ever know that technical term, bad? That was what I got. And it was in a neighborhood of Brooklyn that I didn't ordinarily travel to. I walk into this because I was still searching. Guy looks up at me, says, hello, looks down and starts writing on the prescription pad, and then hands me the prescription. And I was a little taken aback, and I said, can you tell me what this is? And he said, yes, it's a prescription for something you got to put all over your body, lie on the bed like you were being crucified. I thought that was effective. Knew I was Jewish. And then you wait an hour and you take a shower and you do that twice and it'll go away. I said, doctor, I've been living with this thing for a year and a half. Can you tell me what it is? He said, well, yes, I can. It's blah, blah, blah. I said, well, how do you know that? And all those other people didn't do it. And he said, you were in the Caribbean, right? I said, yeah. He said, well, that's where I'm from. And you have blah, and this is the cure for it. Now go home and get crucified. And it worked. You got to keep looking. Sometimes we want not just what we want, but we want what we want to be easy. We want to take a pill that's going to make it go away, like that thing that the dermatologist gave me. Sometimes it can happen. Most often it's not going to happen. There are things you can do that are going to take a lot of time and a lot of energy when time and energy may not be an infinite supply. And the life space you're going to live in may be different from what you thought it was going to be. Stories about the itching and the shoes and the bathroom and sleeping on ice, all of those may become part of your reality. From the outside, it's like, I could never do that. Well, from the outside, it was like, I don't want a wheelchair. Well, from the inside, life in a wheelchair is just fine. Not such a big deal. I don't take the metro anymore. I do some things differently. I've changed some things around. My life is great. Of course, the students whose term papers I grade don't always agree, but you know, I'm happy with it. Now, this leads me to probably the one point where my perspective may be a little bit different from my younger colleagues, some of whom I hope might want to grow up and become psychologists. I think they'd be great. I'll write them recommendation letters for graduate school, which is, do you or don't you want to live in the mainstream? There's a lot of great things about being with all the other kids, being in the mainstream. And sometimes some people don't want to be there. There were questions before about homeschooling. Homeschooling as opposed to 2 inadequate hours a week of home instruction can be a very viable option for some kids and some families. Glad to talk more about that. There are times when I don't want to go to a big crowded concert or be, quote, just like everyone else. Sometimes I want to live in my own space with other people with disabilities who are a disproportionate number of my friends. So you may want to be open to a range of options. One of my favorite cinematic moments is the bar scene in Star Wars. Anyone ever see that with all the different aliens, like milling around in the bar? I like that notion. And maybe that's who some of our allies are. So I'm not going to go on forever. What I want to talk a little bit about, what's different when a chronic illness happens to a child as opposed to when it happens to an adult. One of the most profound learnings in healthcare is the work of Herbert Benson, a physician at Harvard. Talks about the notion of remembered wellness and how it explains why 2 people can have exactly the same condition and a wildly different outcome. Some people with good outcomes are like the kids we got to hear this morning, who have some notion in their mind of how life can be and that one way or another they're probably going to get there, and that carries them through. And other people can't imagine or recall that, quote, remembered wellness, unquote, and the outcomes get real complicated. When adults have had a period of good health and then develop a chronic illness, they can work directly on remembered wellness, sometimes on their own, sometimes with the help of professionals. With a kid who is born with a congenital condition, remembered wellness may be there, good stretches, good moments, watching a sibling, something like that. Or it may be that you'll have that for your child, or you'll be pulling together the fragments. But the notion of how life can be, how it can be for stretches, how to get there, this is going to be really key. Life changes, and so no one else's life can be the model for your life or your household's life or your kid's life. Yeah, it's great to want to do things like other kids, and sometimes it's going to be the imagination. I can't play football, but I can ride a horse. I can't do this, I'm going to do that. You want to go with what works for your child and devote a lot of attention to that. Kids have an incredible developmental momentum. A lot of times when my colleagues who work with adults say, well, you know, how come you like working with kids? They can't just tell you what's going on, like some of our patients can. I say, yeah, that's true, but my patients get better and yours typically don't. No offense. Kids, that development carries kids through all kinds of stuff. And we heard from your kids, our kids, some of the things they like. Roller coasters, pizza, amusement parks. I would add comic books, probably video games, you know, stuff like that. One of my magic tricks is that in my office, I have these paperweights. They're blown glass paperweights. They're all made by teenagers. My brother lives near a deposit of a special kind of sand that people make blown glass with, and came to a point where nobody wanted to make blown glass anymore. They all wanted to write software programs, or I don't know what people want to do these days. And before the guys who owned the glass blowing place gave up, they called the local vocational school and said, by any chance you have a couple of people that want to learn how to blow glass? They found a couple of teenagers and they made my paperweights. When kids come into my office, they love my paperweights. And my paperweights cost a certain amount of money, and I like them, and I don't want them broken. But I tell my child patients, you can touch them if you're careful, and kids who are not respectful anywhere else are respectful with those paperweights. And when I have to go see a kid in a hospital, I always bring one of my paperweights with me. It's that kind of thing that gets a lot of people through. Bunch of points I don't want to make because I always write twice as much as I'm supposed to. What works in terms of parenting strategies? One, you have to know your own values. Now, another one of my magic tricks is that my desk is always a mess. And when kids and parents are having a fight over messy bedrooms and they come into my office for the first time, the kid looks at my desk, grins from ear to ear, and the parents look at their toes. This is an awkward moment for a psychologist. And I have this line that I often use in that situation. I ask the parent, well, you saw my desk, what's that like for you? And when the parent says in a calm and collected way, my kid is not going to have their desk that way, and they stare at me like, you might be fired. Let's going to see what you're going to do right now. I look at the kid and say, I'm not the one that's going to give you your allowance. They are. And that's how you get through. You respect the family's values. It's important to acknowledge and reward and celebrate the positive, the simple pleasures of the day. When your kid figures out about the silk sheets or the ice water bath or the oatmeal in the sock, let them know what a great thing they just did, because that positive feeling is going to get you through a lot. And another thing which you are free to quote to your children without paying me any kind of royalty fee whatsoever. Don't let kids get away with murder. So at appropriate moments, you can say to your child, well, I heard a very renowned professor of psychology at the weekend conference, and he said, not to let you get away with murder, so give it up. And that can sometimes get you through. Restore the balance. It's real useful to make space for letting your child tell you what they think, what they feel, what they want, and positively reinforce the value of them always being able to talk to you and tell you what's on their minds, even if it's the last thing that you want to hear. You want to keep that channel open. It's a great idea for parents to find someone you can trust, who you can talk to about specifics. I love the line, like, I tell the general version to most of the kids, and then I have these 3 people that I tell everything about Alagille to. You want that for yourself. You want someone where you can just let it all out. Might be a physician, and if so, it's more likely to be a family practitioner, someone like that, than the super specialist. Could be a nurse or a nurse practitioner, could be a member of the clergy, could be a great friend. Diseases happen in bodies, but they also happen in families. And you want to take into account the needs and the thoughts and the points of view of everyone in the family, even if any given moment in time you can't put it all together. Letting people have a voice makes a lot of sense. 2 more things and then I'm done. Plus they're getting together the lunch outside, so I know I gotta hurry. I want to mention, because I don't want it in a group like this to go without mentioning, that we're talking about positives, about good things, about tactics and strategies that can work, and they don't always work. And people go through awful times, and I would imagine that in a group of this size, perhaps some of you have lost children. Others of you may lose children way before their time. In that case, your child will become acquainted with my son, who I lost at a very young age. It happens, and it's awful, and there's that kind of time outside of time. And whatever gets you through that time, I want to acknowledge and I want to support. Every so often, less often these days than when my career started and we didn't have the great medications and treatments we have now, I lose a kid. And I live in a high-rise condominium, and I'm a pretty good neighbor. When I lose a kid, one of my patients, I play the drums, I play them loud, I play them at night. And I have the best soundproofing I can afford. And when I moved into the place where I live, I told all my neighbors what I do for a living. And if you hear the drums through the wall, I'm sorry, I'm not going to stop. If you want, I'll buy you earplugs. Won't happen all that often. You do what you need to do. And on the other side of that, what you've lived through with your child, it's going to guide all the rest of your life. A lot of other things I could do as a psychologist, I don't want to do any of them, because the privilege of being with kids and families struggling with some of the illnesses that we get our way through together, I wouldn't trade it for the world. So that's my best take on the propaganda that's useful that I can offer. And we have a few minutes before lunch. You'll tell me, please, when to be quiet so everyone can eat, but open to your questions. And if I can't see you when you raise your hand like this, go like that. And whoever's passing around the mic, that'd be great.
So do we have any questions? And then are you available afterwards if people would like to come up with and speak with you privately?
I'm available afterwards during lunch, absolutely.
Wonderful. So at that, I think everyone is starting to smell the food. So, but I want to thank Dr. Richard Ruth for coming and spending some time with us this morning.